She broke 2 ribs on a mountain in Switzerland, and the insurance company told her she wasn't covered. She didn't argue, she just opened her policy to Appendix B, the page she had added herself for $23. The resort at Verbier sits at 1,500 meters above sea level, and on a clear January morning, the light there has a quality that is difficult to describe to someone who has not seen it. A particular sharpness, like the air itself, has been cleaned of everything unnecessary, so that the mountains stand against the sky with an almost aggressive clarity, every ridge and couloir precise and unhurried and entirely indifferent to the humans moving across them on thin strips of fiberglass. Elena Vasquez had been coming to Verbier for 4 winters, and she still felt the same thing every time she stepped off the gondola at the top of Montfort. A specific kind of quiet that existed nowhere else in her life. Not silence, exactly. The wind was always present, and the sound of skis on packed snow had its own language, but quiet in the sense of a mind that had temporarily stopped running the calculations it ran everywhere else. Risk matrices, policy structures, coverage gaps, exclusion clauses. She was very good at exclusion clauses. It was, professionally speaking, her primary skill. Elna was a senior underwriter at a mid-sized specialty insurance firm called Carver and Holt, based in Chicago, where she had spent 9 years developing what her colleagues described as an almost unsettling ability to find the exact point at which a policy said something different from what the client believed it said. She was the person the firm called when a claim was disputed and someone needed to read the contract the way it was actually written, rather than the way everyone assumed it had been written. She had a reputation for being thorough in a way that occasionally made people uncomfortable, because thoroughness in insurance has a way of revealing that the comfortable assumptions were comfortable precisely because nobody had looked at them too carefully. She had applied this same thoroughness to her own travel insurance policy before leaving for Verbier. This was not paranoia, it was professional habit. The same way a structural engineer checks the load-bearing calculations before walking onto a bridge. She had purchased her policy through a standard travel insurance provider, a mid-market product, broadly adequate, the kind that most leisure travelers buy and never think about again. She had read it in full on a Sunday evening in November, which had taken approximately 40 minutes, which was 40 minutes more than most people spent on it. On page 14, in a section titled Exclusions and Limitations, she had found what she was looking for, or rather what she had expected to find and had been professionally trained to find: a clause excluding coverage for injuries sustained during extreme sports activities, defined in Appendix A as including, among other things, downhill skiing on groomed or ungroomed terrain at any designated ski resort or mountain facility. She had read this clause 3 times. Then she had gone to the insurance provider's website and purchased a rider, an optional add-on listed under Adventure and Winter Sports Coverage Extension, designated in the policy architecture as Rider Section 7.4. The cost was $23. It extended coverage to include injuries sustained during recreational downhill skiing, snowboarding, and related winter sports activities at licensed resort facilities, with a maximum benefit of $100,000 for medical evacuation, emergency treatment, and related costs. She had added it to her cart the way you add batteries at the checkout counter: automatic, practiced, certain. The confirmation email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday in November. She filed it in a folder on her laptop labeled Verbier January and went to bed. The fall happened on the 4th day. She was on the Atellus Run, a red-graded trail that she had skied a dozen times without incident. Not technical, not aggressive, the kind of run you take in the early afternoon when your legs are tired and you want something that flows rather than something that demands. The ice patch was invisible under a thin layer of fresh snow, the particular kind of hazard that doesn't announce itself until it's already happened. Her left ski caught, her body went right, and she landed on her side on a slope that offered no particular cushion. She lay still for a moment, doing the professional assessment that happens in the seconds after an impact, the inventory of what hurts and how much, and in what quality of way, because the quality of pain tells you things. What she found was a sharp, specific pain on her left side, consistent with the lower rib area, that intensified with breathing and did not feel like bruising. She said one word, quietly, to no one in particular. Then she flagged down a passing skier and asked them to contact the ski patrol. The mountain rescue team arrived within 7 minutes, professional and efficient, and transported her by sled to the resort's medical facility at the base. The physician on duty, a calm Swiss doctor named Erica, who had clearly done this many times, ordered x-rays and confirmed what Elena had already suspected. 2 fractured ribs, left side with no pneumothorax, which meant painful but not dangerous, which meant several days of rest and careful breathing, and a medical bill that would require documentation for the insurance claim. Elena thanked the doctor, accepted the prescription for pain management, and asked for copies of all medical documentation in both English and French. Then she called her insurance provider to initiate the claim. The agent she reached was polite and efficient and explained, in the particular tone of someone delivering information they believed to be final, that her policy did not cover injuries sustained during downhill skiing, as this fell under the extreme sports exclusion detailed in Appendix A, and that she was welcome to submit the medical documentation for review, but that based on the information provided, coverage would not apply. Elena held the phone for a moment. "I'd like to note for the record," she said, "that my policy includes Rider Section 7.4, the Adventure and Winter Sports Coverage Extension, purchased November 14th. I'd suggest your team review the full policy document before confirming the denial. I'll make a note of that," the agent said. "You'll receive a written determination within 5 to 7 business days. Thank you," she said. She hung up, adjusted the position of the ice pack against her ribs, and opened her laptop. The written determination arrived in 4 business days. It took her approximately 90 seconds to read it and another 30 seconds to decide what to do next. The denial letter was 4 paragraphs long and had the confident, slightly impersonal tone of a document that has been produced many times before with minor variations in the name and claim number fields. It cited Appendix A. It cited the extreme sports exclusion. It noted that downhill skiing at a licensed resort facility fell within the defined exclusion category. It expressed regret for her injury and wished her a speedy recovery. It did not mention Rider Section 7.4. Elena read it twice, and she set it on the desk of her hotel room. She had extended her stay by 3 days at the physician's recommendation, which she had done without complaint because her ribs hurt when she moved quickly, and the mountain view from the window was, objectively, one of the better things she had looked at in recent memory. Outside, the afternoon light was doing its particular January thing with the snow, turning everything a shade of blue-white that existed only at altitude, and she allowed herself 30 seconds to look at it before she went back to the letter. Then she opened her laptop and began writing. The response she drafted was not emotional. It was not accusatory. It was 4 pages long and structured with the precision of a document written by someone who had spent 9 years identifying exactly the places where insurance language creates obligations that the issuing party would prefer to overlook. It cited Rider Section 7.4 in full. It quoted the rider's specific language covering injuries sustained during recreational downhill skiing at licensed resort facilities, which was, she noted, an exact description of what had occurred. It included the rider's purchase confirmation, the timestamp, the policy number, and a screenshot of the add-on's product page as it had appeared on the provider's website in November, in case there was any ambiguity about what the product was designed to cover. It also included one additional item: a citation to the applicable consumer protection regulation governing insurance claims handling in her home state, which required insurers to conduct a thorough and reasonable investigation of all claims before issuing a denial, and which defined the failure to review a policy in its entirety, including all riders and endorsements, as a claims handling deficiency that could constitute bad faith denial under statute. She had underlined that phrase, not for emphasis. She was writing to a claims department, not a jury, but because underlining it made the letter more precise, and precision was the point. She sent it at 9:14 p.m., certified email with red receipt CVAITSEED to the State Insurance Regulatory Authority's Consumer Complaint Portal. Then she ordered room service, ate carefully because of the ribs, and watched the mountain go dark through the window. The provider's claims department received the letter the following morning. What happened inside the building after that? She could only infer from the timeline of subsequent events. But the inference was not difficult for someone who understood how insurance organizations respond when a claim file suddenly contains a citation to the bad faith statute alongside a rider they had apparently not reviewed. A supervisor reviewed the file. The supervisor found rider section 7.4. The supervisor called the original claims agent, who had not accessed the full policy document, a not uncommon procedural shortcut in high-volume claims environments, where the initial review often focuses on the base policy and the exclusion list rather than the complete endorsement package. The supervisor then pulled the claims handling guidelines, which required review of all policy components before denial issuance. The supervisor sat with this for a moment. Elena received a call at 11:30 a.m. from a senior claims representative named David, who introduced himself as a member of the escalations team and who had a tone that was noticeably different from the original agent, more measured, more careful, the particular register of someone who is managing a situation rather than processing a routine claim. He told her that they were reviewing her file in light of her correspondence. He told her that a final determination would be issued within 5 business days. And he asked if she had any additional documentation she wished to submit. "I believe my letter was comprehensive," she said. "Of course," he said. "We'll be in touch." She thanked him. She hung up. Outside the window, a group of skiers were making their way down the Atelis Run in the afternoon light, their tracks crossing the exact place where she had fallen 4 days ago. The ice patch long since skied over and invisible again, the mountain already indifferent to the specific event it had hosted. She had 4 days left in Verbier. Her ribs still hurt when she breathed deeply. She was not going to ski again on this trip, which she accepted with the practical equanimity of someone who understood that the mountain would still be there next January. She ordered another coffee and opened a new document on her laptop. What she was writing now was not for the insurance company. It was something she had been thinking about since the denial letter arrived, a formal complaint to the state regulatory authority that she had already CC'd on her response, because the CC was not a threat but a signal, and signals in regulatory contexts have a way of accelerating timelines in a manner that private correspondence alone rarely achieves. The question was not whether she would be paid. The question now was what it would cost them to have tried not to. A $23 rider, a 4-page response, a CC to the state regulator. She didn't hire a lawyer, she didn't go to the press, she just knew exactly which 3 moves to make. Subscribe to find out what the arbitrator's ruling said about the insurer's conduct. The formal complaint to the State Department of Insurance was submitted on a Thursday, 8 days after Elena had returned from Verbier, in the precise and documented format that the department's online portal required: claim number, policy number, insurer name, nature of the dispute, and a chronological summary of events supported by attached documentation. The attached documentation was thorough. It included the original policy, the rider purchase confirmation, the denial letter, her 4-page response, the read receipt confirming the response had been received, and the transcript of her phone call with David from the escalations team, which she had recorded with proper disclosure at the start of the call, a habit she had developed in a professional context and maintained in personal ones. It also included a 1-page analysis she had written herself, not as an attorney, she was careful to note, but as a licensed insurance professional with 9 years of underwriting experience, outlining the specific claims handling deficiencies she had identified in the processing of her claim. These included the failure to review the complete policy document prior to denial, the issuance of a denial letter that did not reference or address the rider, and the absence of any documentation in the claim file, which she had requested and received under her state's insurance records access statute, indicating that rider section 7.4 had been considered at any point before the denial was issued. She filed the complaint at 9:47 a.m. and received an automated acknowledgement at 9:48. The Department of Insurance assigned a case examiner within 48 hours. The examiner's name was Thomas Riley, and he sent her a brief professional email confirming receipt of the complaint and noting that the insurer had been notified and given 15 business days to respond. The insurer's response arrived in 11. It was written by a different attorney than the one who had drafted the denial letter, a senior member of the company's regulatory affairs team, which was a different department from claims with a different set of priorities. The regulatory affairs team's primary concern was not whether the claim was valid. The regulatory affairs team's primary concern was the relationship between the company and the State Department of Insurance, which oversaw their license to operate and conducted periodic market conduct examinations, and which tended to look with a particular kind of attention at insurers whose claims files showed patterns of incomplete policy review prior to denial issuance. The response acknowledged that Rider Section 7.4 had not been identified in the initial review of Elena's claim. It attributed this to a processing oversight in the initial handling stage. It offered to reopen the claim for full review under the correct policy terms. Thomas Riley forwarded this response to Elena with a brief note. The insurer has indicated willingness to reopen your claim. Would you like to proceed through the department's mediation process, or do you prefer to handle directly with the insurer? She chose mediation. Not because she needed it, she was fairly certain at this point that the direct claim review would result in payment. She chose it because the mediation process created a formal record, and a formal record in a regulatory context had a different weight than a private settlement, particularly if the claims handling deficiencies she had identified were part of a pattern rather than an isolated oversight. And she had no direct evidence of a pattern, but she had 9 years of experience with how high-volume claims departments operate, and the particular shortcut that had produced her denial, reviewing the base exclusion list without checking the full endorsement package, was not the kind of shortcut that people develop in response to a single unusual case. It was the kind of shortcut that develops when nobody catches it often enough to make stopping worth the time. The mediation session was scheduled for a Tuesday, 3 weeks after she had filed the complaint, conducted by video call with Thomas Riley as the neutral party and a senior representative from the insurer's regulatory affairs team, the same attorney who had drafted the response, on the other end. Elena joined from her kitchen table in Chicago, with her coffee on the left and her documentation folder on the right, and the particular quality of stillness that comes from knowing exactly what you are doing and exactly why. The session lasted 53 minutes. The insurer's representative opened by acknowledging the oversight and confirming that a full review of the claim under the correct policy terms was appropriate. Thomas Riley asked a series of procedural questions about the claim's handling process. Elena answered her questions calmly in sequence, citing document numbers. At one point, the insurer's representative said something about isolated processing error, and Elena said, without particular emphasis, that she would leave that characterization to the department's own assessment, at which point the conversation moved on. The formal mediation agreement was reached at the 51-minute mark. The insurer agreed to full payment under Rider Section 7.4. Medical expenses, evacuation costs, and associated documentation fees totaling $84,200. They also agreed to a penalty payment of $4,100 under the state's bad faith claims handling statute, which Thomas Riley had raised independently based on the documentation in the complaint file. Elena signed the agreement and thanked Thomas Riley, and she made herself a second cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the Chicago street below, gray and cold and nothing at all like Verbier, which was fine, because they were not the same kind of place and she did not expect them to be. The mountains were for one thing, the kitchen table was for another. Both were necessary. The payment arrived by wire transfer on a Friday, 12 days after the mediation agreement was signed. Elena saw the notification on her phone at 7:23 a.m. before her coffee was ready, which meant she processed the information in the particular unguarded way that early mornings allow. Without the professional composure that would have attended it at any other hour, she looked at the number on the screen, she set the phone down, she finished making the coffee. Then she sat at the kitchen table and allowed herself to think with some care about what had actually happened. The money was not the primary thing. She was clear about this. The money was the correct outcome, the outcome that the policy had guaranteed when she purchased it, that the writer had specified in plain language, that the mediation had confirmed. It was not a windfall. It was not a victory in the dramatic sense. It was, in the precise technical language of insurance claims, a valid benefit payment under a valid policy, executed according to the terms of a valid contract. What interested her more was the mechanism. She had spent 9 years on the underwriting side of the insurance industry, the side that writes the policies, prices the risk, constructs the language that creates the obligations. She understood better than most people how the gap between what a policy says and what a claimant believes it says creates most of the friction in the claims process. But she also understood, and this was the part that her colleagues sometimes found uncomfortable to discuss, how the same gap operated in reverse, how the gap between what a policy says and what the claims department believes it says could be used, intentionally or through habit, to deny claims that should be paid. The shortcut that had produced her denial was not new to her. She had seen versions of it in the claims audits she had conducted as part of her underwriting work. The tendency in high-volume environments to route claims through the exclusion list first and the full policy document second, or sometimes not at all. It was efficient. It caught most things correctly, but it created a systematic vulnerability at the edge in the cases where a rider or endorsement modified the exclusion in ways that the base policy didn't reflect. She had written a memo about this once, 2 years ago, as part of an internal quality review at Carver and Holt. The memo had been received with polite interest and filed in a shared drive where it had remained, to her knowledge, unacted upon. She thought about the memo now. She also thought about the penalty. The $4,100 bad faith penalty was, in absolute terms, not large, a minor line item in an insurer's quarterly operations budget, unlikely to generate a board-level conversation or a procedural review. But, in regulatory terms, it was a marker. It went into the insurer's file at the Department of Insurance. It became part of the record that Thomas Riley's office maintained. If the department conducted a market conduct examination, the periodic review of insurer claims handling practices, this file would be part of the sample they pulled. She had not engineered this outcome. She had simply filed a complaint, attached her documentation, and let the process run. But she understood what the process produced, and she understood what it was worth. She opened her laptop and pulled up the internal project management system at Carver and Holt. She found the memo she had written 2 years ago, and she opened it, read it through, and began updating it, some not substantially, but with the addition of a case study section at the end, anonymized and framed in general terms, describing the mechanics of a claims handling failure that a properly structured endorsement package review procedure would have caught before denial. She sent the updated memo to her department head at 9:15 a.m. with a brief note, updated with a recent case study I think is relevant. Worth a conversation when you have time. Then she closed the laptop and finished her coffee. Outside the kitchen window, Chicago was doing its February thing, gray and purposeful, the city moving through the cold with the particular efficiency of a place that has long since stopped being surprised by winter. It was nothing like the light at Verbier, nothing like the sharpness of the air at Montfort, nothing like the mountains standing against the blue-white sky with their aggressive, indifferent clarity. But she was already thinking about next January. She had already checked the snow forecast for Verbier. She had already renewed her travel insurance. Same provider, same rider, rider section 7.4, $23, adventure and winter sports coverage extension. Some things were simply worth knowing how to do correctly. The meeting with her department head happened on a Wednesday, 2 weeks after she sent the updated memo. His name was Graham Aldis, and he had been at Carver and Holt for 22 years, long enough to have seen several cycles of the same institutional habits that Elena had been writing about, and smart enough to recognize the memo for what it was. Not a complaint, not a grievance, but a structural observation from someone who had recently occupied both sides of the table at once. He read it again in the meeting, while she sat across from him with her coffee and waited. "The case study is useful," he said. "You experienced this personally?" "Yes," she said. "And the regulatory outcome? Bad faith finding? Penalty? Full payment?" She said it without particular emphasis, the way she said most things. Herderton Graham set the memo on the desk and looked at it for a moment. He had the particular expression of a person who is recalibrating something, Not dramatically, but in the quiet, incremental way that experienced professionals recalibrate when evidence arrives in an inconvenient form. The review procedure we have for endorsement packages, he said. It's not consistently applied at the claims stage, she said. It's applied at underwriting. At claims, the standard workflow routes to the exclusion list first. The endorsement review is supposed to happen, but there's no enforcement mechanism. That's a gap, he said. Yes, she said, it is. Graham picked up a pen. He made a note. One line, she couldn't read it from her side of the desk. Then he looked up. I'd like you to develop this into a process recommendation, he said. Claims review protocol. Endorsement verification checklist, training component, full proposal. Can you have something to me in 3 weeks? 2, she said. He almost smiled. 2 weeks, he agreed. She went back to her desk and opened a new document. Outside the office window, Chicago was gray and ongoing, the same as it always was in February, the lake somewhere beyond the buildings, doing its cold and enormous thing. She had a blank page in front of her and a problem she understood well and 2 weeks to turn one into the other. She uncapped her pen, the good one, the one she kept on the right side of her desk, and started writing. The proposal she delivered 14 days later ran to 22 pages and included a complete endorsement verification protocol, a claims routing flowchart with mandatory checkpoint flags for riders and add-ons, and a training module outline for claims handlers, and an audit mechanism designed to catch systematic deviations before they became regulatory matters. It was, by any reasonable assessment, the kind of document that gets filed in a shared drive and occasionally referenced in compliance reviews, or it was the kind of document that gets implemented. Graham implemented it. The rollout took 4 months. Training, system updates, a revised claims handling manual that included, for the first time, a mandatory full policy review step prior to any denial issuance. The implementation memo that went to the claims department cited recent industry cases illustrating the regulatory and reputational exposure associated with incomplete endorsement review and referenced the updated internal audit framework that would track compliance. Elena was listed as the protocol's author. She had asked for that specifically, not for credit in the public sense. This was an internal document visible only within the firm, but because her name in the author field was the precise, permanent record of where the thing had come from. The same logic as the copyright registration, the same logic as the rider purchase confirmation, the same logic as the certified email with read receipt. In the world of insurance and compliance, the things that are written down are always worth more than the things that are simply assumed. She knew this the way she knew the mountain. Not as an idea, but as a fact, confirmed by experience, repeatable and reliable, available to anyone willing to read the whole document rather than stopping at the exclusion list. On the day the rollout was complete, she came home to the apartment, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a blank sketchbook she had bought on a whim at a stationery shop near the office. She had not been a person who kept sketchbooks. That was a different story, a different protagonist, but she had been thinking lately about Verbier, about the light at altitude, about the particular quality of a form that is exactly what it needs to be, and nothing more. She opened to the first page. She drew a mountain. One line for the ridge, clean and certain, the way good things always are when you finally understand what they are. She wrote her name in the corner, small and legible, the date underneath it. Then she closed the sketchbook and finished her coffee.